This is Ray Stokes from the Oral History section of the Library of the Texas College of Osteopathic Medicine in Fort Worth. Today is Thursday, February the 23rd, 1984, and it's my pleasure to be in the office. One of my favorite friends and professional members of the osteopathic profession, Dr. H. George Grainger, who has been in practice in Tyler, Texas, here on Bodark Street, South Bodark Street, I believe it is. It's 704 South Bodark, Tyler, Texas. Dr. George Grainger is a very prominent citizen of the city of Tyler, Texas. Very active, has been, of course. He has been in practice here since 1931, I believe he told me recently. He is a general practitioner. He's well known throughout the piney woods of East Texas. He's not only an excellent physician, but he also is well known as a prominent poet, an artist. We'll get into some of those attributes that he has and discuss those momentarily. But Dr. George, I'm going to call you Dr. George because now Dr. George used to be one of my bosses. We'll get into that as to why he was one of my bosses momentarily. But today, I'd like for Dr. George to kindly, I want to pick your brain if I can, Dr. George. You say you came to Tyler in 1931, opened up a practice. At that particular time, I'm sure the osteopathic profession wasn't as well identified as it is today. And I don't imagine the image of the profession was greatly established as it is today. So would you start in 1931 and give us a little resume? Where did you get your education?
Yes, indeed I will. Speaking of 1931 first.
Yes.
And the image. I came with Dr. Coates, came in with Dr. H.R. Coates.
H.R. Coates. Tell us a little about him.
Dr. Coates was a tall, fine man who had the respect of every physician in Tyler. He was the only osteopathic physician at the time, but he was the X-ray man, and all 17 medics that we had in Tyler at that time. There are now about 170.
Is that right?
Used him as in consultation on X-ray, and he was well thought of. So that osteopathy was pretty well established in Tyler. The high degree of osteopathy. Dr. Coates, by the way, started the first hospital in Tyler, and with Dr. Gaffney later on.
Gaffney, what's his given name?
His given name was Milton,
No.
Dr. Milton Gaffney, who is now dead. But getting back to my background, it's not very distinguished. I was teaching in school in Washington, D.C.
Washington, D.C.
When I was persuaded to become an osteopathic physician. I had an uncle whom I admired more than anybody else, even more than my father, for his intellectual ability.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought a lot of my father. This uncle was a preacher, and he had 3 fingers off on one hand and 2 off on the other hand, and he had told me when I was very small that if he hadn't lost his fingers, he would have become an osteopath. And so that is where I got interested in osteopathy way back 1912, 15, way back then.
Mm-hmm.
And so that after I had studied, after I had become a teacher and saved a little money, I applied for entrance in the old American School of Osteopathy, which is now KCOS Kirksville.
In Kirksville. May I ask, did you ever meet the founder, Dr. A.T. Still?
No, Dr. Still died in 1917, and I entered in 1925.
Dr. George, you have mentioned that you were teaching when you first showed an interest in the osteopathic profession. What were you teaching?
Well, this is quite interesting, I think, because it has to do with the use of the hands.
Use of the hands?
The use of the hands. I taught manual training.
Oh, I see.
I taught shop, in other words.
Is that right?
I shot carpentry.
Now, where did you get your training for that?
I got it in high school. And my high school teacher got me the job as a teacher in Washington, D.C. without ever having any college education, whatever.
That is miraculous. Well, where did you go to high school?
In Western High School in Washington, D.C. for the first 3 years, and Eastern High School in my last year. And it's very interesting, too. At that time, in going to school at Western High School, it was not my choice when I moved to Washington with my daddy. My choice was Central High School, but they sent me to Western because of the location. And it so happened that Western was the most elite high school with all the senators and all of the representatives and even the future president's children that I was associated with.
Is that right? I was going to ask you, and you answered it, though. I was going to ask you if you are a native of D.C. Apparently you're not. You moved there. Where did you move from?
I'm a damn Yankee.
Oh, are you?
Adopted by now, of course.
You certainly.
I was born in Trenton, New Jersey.
Trenton, New Jersey, and then moved as a youth to Washington, D.C.?
No, I moved all over the place. My daddy was a preacher.
I see.
And he
What
was
denomination?
called a Baptist preacher.
Baptist
He was called in various places in the north. Is it still on?
Yes.
So that I jumped from place to place as a child, and when I went to Washington, I graduated from a one-room country schoolhouse. And the age at which one could quit school at that time was 14. But I wasn't old enough to quit, so I took the 8th grade over again, voluntarily.
Right.
And
that was about what year?
Oh, gee, that was back in during World War I. During World War I.
17 or 18 in there.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, now you say that you entered the American School of Osteopathy at Kirksville in 1925.
Right.
Then you got out then about 1928 or 9.
29.
29.
Right at the beginning of the Depression.
And where did you intern?
I had no internship.
No internship. You went immediately into practice?
Into practice.
All right. I imagine your practice at that time was it restricted? Were you able to issue prescriptions and that
That's
sort
why
of
I
thing?
came to Texas. Texas was
Give
the
us a
very
little
only
elaboration
state
on
in
that.
which we could practice as physicians.
As physicians.
And I located first in Canyon, Texas. First,
West
really,
Texas.
in Waco, Texas, for just a short time, and then moved to Canyon, Texas within 2 months.
How long then did you practice there? About a year or 2 years?
A year and a half in Canyon, where I met my wife.
So, is that where Mrs. Grainger's from?
Right.
In Canyon.
Well, she was in school there.
In West Texas State, which is now West Texas State?
That's right.
I see. Then that would be 1928 or 9, and
That was 1930.
1930, and you came here in 31, and you've been in. How long have you been in the practice where your location now?
We were down at the bank building of the People's Bank, first in the Citizens Bank building with Dr. Coates, and in 1934 I moved to the People's Bank building. I stayed in the People's Bank building until 1952, when we found that there was a building going to be built on South Burdock right close to my home, and it was going to be used as a little as a residence. And we persuaded the builders to build it into an office, and we bought it. That was in 1952. I've been in practice here since 52.
Well, then that's
in this
32
office.
years you've been here then.
Right.
All right, Dr. George, do you recall any particular, before we began to tape this interview, we were talking about your good friend Dr. Kinsey, whom I had the pleasure of interviewing yesterday up at Lindale, and he's credited with causing Earl Campbell to discover America, the famous football player, and I understand you had a little bit of a part in making his discovery nationally known. Could you tell us a little
I do
bit
a little
about
bit of public relations work in my life. You know,
Right.
I've been doing a little writing right along.
Right.
And one time, a lot of scientific writing, or pseudoscientific at least, and I want to tell you about some of that that I'm proud of later, if we have enough time.
Oh, yes.
And but with Earl, it's interesting. These two fellows are Scotchmen, you know, Earl Campbell and Earl Kinsey. Both of them are Scotch.
I see.
And we have a lot of fun about about Earl being
The black Scotch, huh?
or they all being kinfolks.
Right.
Well, it so happened that Dr. Kinsey puts out a little very interesting Christmas card every year. It's a little Christmas paper on one side telling the events, what happened to his family and all that during the year. And at this particular time, maybe 10 years ago now, he sent this to us, and I noticed that he had mentioned about having delivered a little baby one time. His name was Earl Campbell. That's when Earl Campbell had just beginning his fame at Texas, really, at the University of Texas. And so I'd have a good rapport with our local newspaper, and I took the item down to the newspaper right away.
Let's give the newspaper a plug. What's the name of
Tyler
the
Courier Times Telegraph.
I see.
I took it down to the editor, Mr. Everett Taylor, who realized its interest there and its value, and he wrote up on it a good article, and it was picked up by the Associated Press and became Earl Kinsey, and became a national celebrity as the doctor who delivered Earl Campbell.
I see. Well, that's excellent. Have you delivered anyone equally as famous as Earl Campbell? How many babies have you delivered in your lifetime, Dr. George?
I quit perhaps 20 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and I have an old file full of babies I've delivered, and I still have a check from one of them. It was a baby whom I delivered at home, and the baby weighed 13 and a half pounds,
13
and the husband gave me a check for $25, and it was hot, and I still have that check.
Well, I guess that's one of the most memorable experiences you had then.
Well, I get a lot of hot checks in those days, particularly on delivery of babies.
They didn't even give you a trade out in potatoes or eggs or anything of that nature.
No. I remember I would go to Lindale and deliver babies, and then go back and see them 2 or 3 times, and charge them $50 for the whole thing, including
regardless of the number of trips. Huh?
And regardless of the number of visits to the office prenatally.
$50.
I give each woman osteopathic treatment each month that they came to.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you brought that out and pointed that out. Any other individual that you can call, maybe not necessarily famous, but some exceptional experience in life, or some exceptional contribution to life that you've been associated with?
Indeed. When you came in, I was looking over some literature. I had written an article. It was a scientific article called The Common Quick, Osteopathic Considerations, Physiologic Considerations of the Common Quick. and I had been studying the anatomy and physiology of the muscle spindle. And I had a good deal of correspondence from physicians and researchers from all over the world, one of whom was Ragnar Granite. Ragnar Granite was
How would he spell that?
Ragnar Granit. And Dr. Granite was one of the most famous physiologic researchers today. It so happened that in my correspondence with him, I used him as my focal point, his research as my focal point in developing this thesis of how the spindle works in producing the osteopathic lesion, and how correcting the lesion is related to the tying up of this spindle. And the next year, after the publication of my article, and it was in the Journal of Neurophysiology, by the way, it was a lead article in the Journal of Neurophysiology.
What year was that, Dr. George?
The year was 1962, Volume 1, Number 1 of the Journal of the American College of Neurophysiologists, which is an osteopathic publication.
Uh-huh.
And yes, the very next year, following the publication, Dr. Granite was given a Nobel Prize in Physiology. And I thought that was a very satisfactory individual to do work with. It so happened his Nobel Prize was given for previous work, that on the eye. But Dr. Granite is an exceptional man. And there's an interesting story here about Dr. Granite. When Kennedy died, when he was killed, President Kennedy was killed, of course, following that, the Kennedy coins came out, the silver coins, silver $50, and I sent one of these to Dr. Granite. And Dr. Granite wrote back, thanked me for this medal that I had sent him, stating that as president of the Neurophysiological Society of Sweden, that he had the privilege of giving the ode to Mr. President Kennedy before the neurophysiologists of the world.
Mm-hmm.
So I just give that insight there.
That's very good. Appreciate that. Let's move along if we can, Dr. George. You know, along about 1960, your profession, the osteopathic profession with headquarters in Fort Worth, began to show concerted interest in establishing a school of osteopathy in the state of Texas, and a great deal of legwork and surveys were conducted, and you were involved in the beginning of that. And as I recall, of course, my knowledge of the profession stems from, actually I'm acquainted with the profession from 1950 forward, but certainly not very well acquainted with it. Now this is your interview, not mine, so I won't take but just a minute to share this with you. 1950, I met one of the founders, Dr. Danny Byer. Yeah. I was a politician at the time, or an aspiring politician. I never quite made it. And he called me in his office one time in 1950. I was running for public office, and he wanted to get acquainted with me because the basic science bill was going to be presented in the legislature during that next term in Austin, and he wanted to get my feelings on the matter, so he called me in, and I visited with him. As the first time that I knew anything
Wasn't that about 1949?
Well, this was 1950.
I was president in 1948, 1949. I know a great deal about all those problems.
I'm sure you were president of TOMA?
Yes.
At that time. Well, I'm glad to work that in. I knew you were a politician, but I didn't know
No,
whether you were. I didn't know whether you were one of these outgoing politicians, or whether you were one behind the scenes. But I'm glad to know
no,
that you made a contribution to both. So, but
no,
seriously,
I was not a politician. I
no,
just happened to be president.
happened to be president, and that was 48 and 49.
Right.
Well, you're well acquainted with one of the founders, Dr. Danny Byer, and like I say, my introduction to osteopathy came through my association with him. But back to your experience, in 1960, 61, various committees were formed. You became interested in the work that Dr. George Lubel and Everett, Dr. Carl Everett and Dr. Dan Byer were initiating, and they went to the trouble and the expense of getting a charter. When I came to work for the school in April of 1969, you were on the board. They had an executive committee made up of the three men that I just mentioned, and then four more members. So you had a total. I had a total. I always considered myself of having 7 bosses at that time, and you were one of my bosses. You were on the original board of directors. It was known as directors, not trustees or regents, but board of directors of the Texas College of Osteopathic Medicine. You got your charter in June 1966. Dr. George, can you give me some insights as to some of the experiences you had in the beginning of the trials and tribulations that you encountered as a member of the board the first few years, as to whether you should or you shouldn't, whether you should try to raise enough money to build a school? Kind of, what are your reflections on that?
That was one of the greatest tribulations, was the raising of sufficient money. And I think we had raised something like, I don't know, you probably know the amount, of $250,000.
No, I'm not trying to correct you, sir, but no, we didn't quite raise that much for the first 2 or 3 years.
Maybe it was pledges.
Well, now pardon me, I will say this. When I came to work, we had $100,000 in pledges, about $10,000 in the bank. And then pledges for about $90,000. That's where we stood at that time as far as pledges. But go ahead, sir.
Well, I'll have to give George Lubel all the credit in the world for, I don't know, for his, I can say faith.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But I can also say cunning. I mean, because he could see through things and knew how to work things in order to get us going that nobody else could do.
I'm glad to hear you give him credit for that. I really
am. Well, I really know that. And I would say genius. I would say genius in his ability and his calculation and his ability and his foresight. So that we started from the top of a hospital on the 4th floor of a hospital, moved into a bowling alley, and from there went up.
Right.
And how we went out to Arlington and looked over a site out there that might have been built up in the next 10 or 15 years. That we thought we might be able to, that we were offered to build a building on, to start a school on, and it was near the airport and had a lot of possibilities in the future, and yet we had to do something right now.
In other words, our future was now. At that time.
And how we used that particular site as an investment and as a selling point in raising, in influencing people in the legislature.
Right, that's right.
To help us get a start.
Here and again, this I don't want to talk too much myself, Dr. George, but at that time, I was a business manager of the school, and I was involved in the transaction, the land deal that was given to us, 50 acres by the Vandergriffs of Arlington and Carlisle Craven. Although we didn't use the land, we eventually gave it back to them, but as a paper transaction saying that it was worth $300,000 is one of the vital reasons that we're in business today, because the Board of Trustees of AOA wouldn't have given you your provisional accreditation if you didn't have a little liquid assets and so forth. So we used that.
Even though it was paper.
That's right. We used that $300,000.
And that's what I mean about the caginess and the astuteness and the striving toward a goal.
Right.
And the use of what we have and our brains in order to achieve those things.
Let's go back just a bit to say when did you do you remember like say I came on in '69 and you were already on the board. Do you remember the date and then the circumstances under which you were elected to the board of directors?
Oh yes, I was just invited to be on.
All right, well give us a little information on that.
Well, George Rubel says, George,
that would be what year? About 68 or 67 or 68?
Around that time.
Uh-huh.
I don't know exactly.
Right.
He's George. Yeah, come on over and let's get on this board. He knew I was interested. Let's get this thing going. Mm-hmm. And so that was the election that I had. I had it from the top man.
Then I believe you're still a clinical associate faculty member, associate professor in the Department of Osteopathic Principles, Practice, and Philosophy. They call it the three P's, OPP and P. Someday maybe all of the osteopathic schools will get together and have the same name. You know, it's OMT in some schools and OPP and P and OTT and T and so forth in other osteopathic schools. Maybe someday they'll all get together and have one department that would have something.
That's a democratic process.
Oh yes, and I don't know that they need to get together in that sense.
That would be good if we had a standardization, if we could settle on it.
Right, right.
And then not only a standardization in words, but a standardization in concept in the minds of the individual who use those words.
Right. Now,
use those techniques.
As a member of the first faculty, and of course you practiced here in Tyler, which is about 135, 140 miles from Fort Worth. You came to Fort Worth once or twice a week, didn't you, during those times?
It was once a week.
Once a week.
At first.
And you still go up occasionally to give a lecture, do you?
Yes, on occasion now. Since it's switched over to the...
we're now state. At that time, the first 5 years, we were private.
I've been more or less neglected.
Oh, you haven't been neglected. They've been holding you in excellent reserve.
Oh, they must have been doing that.
Yeah, right. Well, during those years, with the first...
and by the way, they were without salary. They were voluntary.
Right.
Just for the satisfaction of doing something for the school.
That's one of the reasons why we made it, was through the gracious benevolence of a number of doctors such as you that made it possible for us to, for example, while we're going back down memory lane here for a minute, we had, you mentioned the hospital, the Fort Worth Osteopathic Hospital, where we used the unused fifth floor. You mentioned fourth floor a moment ago, but it was the fifth floor that was unused at the time. We went in and petitioned it off and had our first classes there. But we did show on paper that we had a rent of $40,000 a year. But you know, the hospital never got $40,000. They never got $4. They didn't want it. Don't misunderstand me. We met our obligations, those that we actually had. We did pay our utilities and things of that nature. But
we sneak up the back way to go to school, by the way.
Right. But because of the efforts on your part and those of your contemporaries, made it possible for us to be able to survive, I guess is the word. So during those years, you were very closely identified with the first two classes, at least, the class of 74, which had 18 graduates, and the class of 75, which had 25 graduates. So you and I both pretty well identify ourselves with the first two classes. Can you recall, Dr. George, any particular experience that you had when you were serving on the faculty and giving your lectures and demonstrations to the class members? Any particular outstanding paramount experience you recall?
Yes, indeed. I think I have one here. At one time, at class, I asked each member of this first class to write an article, to write a piece on why he or she, we had one girl in the class,
Right.
decided to become an osteopath. And I have this group of papers here.
Oh, you still have
I have
them, do you?
them here, and I could read some of them off to you. In one case, there's one individual here who couldn't spell the word osteopathy.
That'll go unidentified. We wouldn't want to embarrass him, would we?
So, let me pick up one.
All right, yes, do that,
Let's
Dr.
pick up a
George.
short one here.
All right.
I'd like to pick up one by somebody. Here's Ron Daniels.
Ron Daniels talking about. He's practicing up
Yes.
north of your ways here at Quitman.
He's a member of our East Texas group,
All right.
although we seldom see him. Why I chose a career in osteopathic medicine. I chose a career in osteopathic medicine so that I might have a rewarding profession to devote my time to. Also, I felt that it would be a profession that would offer more as rewards a feeling that I had accomplished something in helping people. I feel that it goes beyond offering to the patient what an allopathic medicine offers. I believe in choosing this career. I felt that the profession would be a growing one and that it was actually a rapidly growing group.
Now that Dr. Daniels'
Signed by
contribution.
Dr. Ron Daniels.
Uh-huh.
Ron Daniels, student doctor.
At that time, yes. Uh-huh.
Freshman.
Freshman. That'd been 1970 then. That'd be October 1970. Well, thank you for sharing that information with us.
Someday I'm
Dr.
going to
George.
give this to the school.
I wish you would. That's the kind of archives that
Archives from the very first class,
I think that's excellent.
the very first year.
I'm gonna keep you to that promise now, Dr. George.
Right.
We've got it on tape. All right, let's move along if we can. Any other particular experience you remember? Of course, did you ever encounter any problems from here to going up to Fort Worth? Any breakdowns or delays and not getting there on time to teach a class? Or
Yes, I would drive there. I would close up my office, give that time, and drive there in time to get to class, and then drive back after class, late at night.
right.
And I just remember one time in which a lady or someone, may not have been a lady driver, I'm sorry, but a driver
Yeah.
in front of me at night decided to amble, and I was going about 65 or 70, decided to amble from her side, the right side of the highway, to the left side right in front of me. And I had to take the shoulder, and I went bumpity, bumpity, bump, and I thought I was about to turn over. And it was after that, shortly after that, that the group decided to take insurance out on us to take care of things like that.
Right. At that time, you weren't, up till that time, you weren't covered. Right.
No.
I understand. Well, thank you, Dr. George. Now, let's move along. Of course, we've come a long way at the school. When I say we, the osteopathic college there in Fort Worth it was a private school for 5 years, and now since 1975, which is about 9 years now, that it doesn't seem that it's been in a way, and in another way it seems much longer, of course. to think in about 2 months I'll have 15 years in with the school.
15 years.
15 years. I was 15. You hired me on the 15th of April, 1969.
Well, I remember that well when you.
Well, the first time I met you was at the first convention they had over in Dallas in 1969 in May. I had been an employee for just some 3 weeks at the time, and you had your board meeting, and it was my pleasure and duty to attend and take minutes. And of course, it was rather strange to me, but still, I look back on it and.
Well, you do a good job now.
That was the experience that I recall in meeting you and the other members of the board of directors. Let's come back to Tyler, Texas for a moment, and in your practice, you have achieved other recognitions. You have been, what year was it that you were the practitioner of the year?
Oh, that was about the same time that you became interested in our profession. That was 1966.
1966.
The date 1966, 1967 was the year that I was given that honor.
Well, that's a tremendous honor, and I know you deserved it. Do you recall any particular experience that you would want to lift up and share that might have occurred during some particular board meeting that you had as a member of the board?
Well, I think so. I think that whoever it was that moved that we established the school, I seconded the motion.
You seconded the motion, huh? Well, I guess the minutes would bear that out as to who that was.
I surely hope we still have the minutes.
Oh, you do? I think you do. That was one of my responsibilities for a number of years.
And then I was on the committee as a board during the changeover to the North Texas group. I was on the committee to select the president of the school, the dean of the school.
Who was that?
The one we have now.
Oh, you mean Dr. Willard?
Right.
Right. Dr. Ralph Willard, he was dean at that time, and then became vice president, and later became president of the school.
Well, yes, indeed. This was in selecting him to become dean, though.
Yeah, right. You were on the search committee at that time.
Right. Mm-hmm. And by the way, another thing I'm rather satisfied with is the fact we have a wonderful institution out of Tyler, the Chest Hospital.
Now, what is the proper name of the Chest Hospital now? It's part of the UT system, isn't it?
University of Texas.
East Texas, is Tyler in the title, or East Texas?
No, Tyler is not. East Texas is not. It's the University of Texas hospital system. Used to be the Chest Hospital.
Right.
We have students that part of the training is continuing training as junior year, I believe, is to take work out there, and I was instrumental to some extent, and in getting that started, I took the dean out there with me, and we got that started. But I'm particularly interested more. I want to tell you more about an experience in which it just so happens you know the right people, and it so happens that Watson Wise, a Tyler oil man, was on the allocation board of in which money is allocated for the various groups, and I got Watson Wise to interview Nolan. What's his name?
C.C. Nolan.
Nolan down here and Watson Wise together.
Right.
We went up to the Petroleum Club, and it was through that interview that we were able to continue and develop this interest in the building of our building, and also that we had a Representative Clark,
Clark.
who was on a
You
committee
remember his
of
complete
5.
name?
Pardon?
You know his complete name?
Oh, I always know that, but I can't think of it now.
Okay.
I'll think of it after we quit.
Right.
Who was on the 5-member committee before that, who determined whether it was worthwhile to give us any money at all to do anything. And it was a vote of 3-2, and Clark was one of those that voted of the 3 that kept it going. So little things like that, little relationships that make you feel that how important it is.
Right.
For to know, if just to be in and know the right people, or know people that you're not using them for that purpose, but in which it turns out that.
Are you referring to construction monies to be given by the state through the legislature?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, then that'd be back. Was that the first construction of the first building, what we call Med Ed 1?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
That was where we got some
Yes.
15 or 16 million to build the current 8-story building that
Right.
we have there.
Mm-hmm.
I see. And that initial vote went 3-2, did it?
3-2 in our favor.
And,
Mm-hmm.
that's good. Now, you know, Dr. Nolan, I call him Dr. Nolan, that's an honorary doctorate. He was president of North Texas State TCOM.
And a great guy.
Until he resigned in 1979, I believe it was. See Dr. Nolan every now and then. In fact, I interviewed him recently. I have him on. I have his memoirs on tape.
Nolan can tell you about that business.
He certainly did. He's now working with the Oklahoma Medical Foundation, Oklahoma City. Okay, Dr. George. Do you recall? I keep going back to the school and keep trying to lift up some experiences that you may have had with some of the students. And you mentioned a moment ago about the chest hospital and the current association that we have on rotations now with our junior students coming down here to Tyler. Do you have any way in which you have any input to their program here? Do you have any contact with them as they move through Tyler? Do they come by and see George Grainger and so forth?
Yes, too often.
Too often.
It seems sometimes.
Right.
There's one little girl that I was interested in getting, and still am, in getting her into our school. She is very talented, very brilliant. She's Chinese. She's Taiwanese. Although she says I'm Chinese, I'm not Taiwanese, but she's a Chinese girl from Taiwan who was a pharmacist here.
Here in Tyler?
In Tyler.
Mm-hmm.
She's moved now to Denton. There's a pharmacy there, to work in the pharmacy. And she graduated from a school in Taiwan. And it seems that our school will not accept her because that school is not accepted. And she wrote me Valentine's Day and told me that she was accepted by a medical school in Texas.
Is that right?
But she doesn't want to be an MD. She wants to be a DO.
My goodness. Well, that's one failure you had, but you had lots of pluses and lots of positives.
Well, it's failure so far. She doesn't say.
In other words, she has applied and hadn't been accepted
Yeah,
at this
she's
time.
been accepted.
But
she may
not at TCOM yet, huh?
No, not to TCOM.
I see.
But, oh yes, I have one who's graduating, one who's graduating this year who applied 3 years in a row and failed. And I consulted with our registrar, what's her name?
Well, the admissions director, Earlene McElroy.
Earlene, surely. Mm-hmm. And she tells me that he's one of the best students that they have. And
do you recall his name?
Oh, yes, Barry.
Well, I ought to know his name because I know who you're talking about because he did a
rotation. Barry Mona.
He did a rotation with you recently, and he came by and gave me some greetings from you. And I don't know why I can't think of his last name, but Barry is, I know who he is.
Sure, I know Barry so darn well.
Right.
Anyway, so he's graduating this year.
Right, Yeah, he's in the class of '84.
Yeah. And then there was another one, a student who was I believe he was interested as a divinity student, but he is in his second year there now.
Mm-hmm.
Kirsch.
Kirsch, yes,
Kirsch.
I know him, or know of him.
Fine young man.
Right.
And there are several who are out and doing well. That one who was a captain in the Air Corps stationed in Canada, that I was proud of him being, except that he's out in practice. He was a Tyler boy. Oh, the name of the young man I was trying to think of a while ago, Barry Molina,
Yeah,
Malina. Very
right.
personal,
That's
very,
right.
very smart little fellow.
Yeah,
And very dedicated.
Seems to be.
And really believed in the osteopathic profession and the manipulative phase of it.
With reference to dedication to the osteopathic profession, Dr. George, I know that certainly applies to you, and I know your first love is osteopathic medicine. But you're a very versatile individual, and you have other avocations, if not vocations. I know you have made quite a contribution to the Fourth Estate, the great repertorial departments of the various writings in your endeavors. You're the correspondent of your local district in the Toma DO. You make some excellent contributions each month. I look forward to reading them. You've written a great deal of poetry. I think you have done certain artwork and so forth. Would you share some of your accomplishments?
Yes. What I'll recite, if I may, one little old poem that I wrote when I turned 75.
Fine.
Stop it. Now that I've reached my 10 and 5, I find that I'm still very much alive. The reaper still is far away, in truth, as far away as ever in my youth. As ever in my youth, but what is queer, he's just as near.
That's excellent, Dr. George. Certainly you've written many poems, I'm sure, and made tremendous contribution. Can you think of anything else that you would like to share?
Oh, I might recite one that I wrote when I was starting out.
When you were starting out?
When I was in high school.
You weren't 70 then?
No, I was hardly 70, not even one score.
All right.
Not even one
Not
score.
one score, all right. Let's hear it.
We hear people talking in this day and age we hear people talk in this day and age. Stop it. Now I'll try again. We hear people talking in this day of age of where us young hopefuls will end. They wrinkle their eyebrows, look wise as a sage, and wonder Stop it. I'm getting old. Can't remember my own writing. We hear people talking in these day and age and wonder how low we'll descend. They wrinkle their eyebrows, look wise as a sage, and wonder how low we'll descend. They take, for example, the flapper so flip, and rake her and shake her with glee. They dissect her ways and her character rip, then tell how good they used to be. But then there are others who know what she is, who are willing to stamp their okay and tell to the world that the present day Liz is the same as in grandmother's day. Now, I've gone to high school for several odd years and mingled where flappers were plenty and studied until I'm as wise as a seer on the subject of maids under 20. And from my observation, she's not a disgrace, though I don't claim that she's very sainted. I find that by studying what's on her face, she's not quite as bad as she's painted.
My goodness, that's tremendous. Well, I'm glad to have captured one of your more recent contributions on your 75th birthday. and then one that you, before you reached 20, that you wrote in the beginning. And I'm sure you've written many in between. And you've had a great number of articles published, not only scientific, but other contributions as well. Any particular artwork that you're proud of, Dr. George? Of course,
Well, yes.
I know we can't. This isn't video, so we can't show it. But maybe you can express some circumstances under which you painted it.
I have a lot of humor in my work, as well as in my writings and my poetry,
right.
and in my life. And it's shown in my art as well, I think. One time, we were showing, that Tyler Art League was showing their exhibits on the square during the annual exhibit on Easter time.
You remember the approximate date, the year?
In Easter.
Oh,
in Easter.
What year?
Oh, this was about 10, 12 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of my paintings was called The Road. And it was a foreshortened picture of the roads and the hills and the valleys on the side. And the road goes through the valley, foreshortened. And the frame was a black frame, and I had a mirror on the frame on the side to make it look like you're looking through the front window, the front of the car.
I see.
And I called it The Road. Well, just for fun, people never wanted to buy any of my paintings. So I put a price on this one, $17,000. And so I marked it to $17,000 without frame. Well, of course, I had a lot of fun with that. And a year or so later, a juried arts group came through Tyler and chose that particular painting to be on exhibit in Austin among the choice paintings from various areas.
Mm-hmm.
So that I wrote down, in this particular thing, I wrote that the cost was open, as far as the cost goes and things like that, called it The Road. And that was it, until a friend of mine from the Art League had come back from Austin, having seen the show down there, and showed me the catalog, showed me the I guess you call it the catalog, and it had listed something like this. It said, the Hills and Valleys by Mrs. So-and-so, $35. And it said, a portrait of an old man, we'll say Miss So-and-so and so, $50. Then it says, The Road, Dr. H.G. Grainger, $37,000.
$37,000.
It knocked me over. I didn't even know it was on that thing.
Is that right?
But it never was sold.
Never was sold.
And I still have it.
You still have
But that's one of my funny things that happened in the Art League. I was president of it 2 years.
2 years. Are you still a member?
No, I'm not a member of that. And as far I've had to slow down since I've had my heart attack. You understand how that is, I understand.
Yes, I can share
but
that.
But you haven't slowed down any.
Well, I hope I've slowed down enough to where I can be as well off as you seem to be. And you're how old now, Dr. George?
I was 80 last year.
80 last year.
But
well, that means you're 81 now then.
Oh, if I add November, I'll be 81.
You'll be 81 in November, and
right.
I'll be 71 in November.
Well, great.
Right.
What day?
25th.
Mine 29th.
29th.
Well, yours is sometime.
I'm 4 days older than you are.
You are at that.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Very good.
Well,
Dr. George, it's been a pleasure to sit here and reminisce with you and to hear some of the highlights of your professional experience and having been in the osteopathic profession for 50 years plus. The contribution that you've made to the healing arts is very spectacular and very gratifying, I'm sure, on your part. And the other accomplishments that you've made seem to me like hog some of the spotlight of your famous career. So I am certainly as a representative of the library, the oral history section of the library at TCOM, I'm grateful for this opportunity of coming by and visiting with you and picking your brain and getting for the future, hopefully, some of the highlights of your career. And we certainly appreciate it very much. And I want to thank you again for this interview. This is Ray Stokes in Dr. George Grainger's office in Tyler, Texas.